The scallop lodged in Dr. Natalie Morrison's throat at exactly 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening that would change everything. One moment she was cutting the delicate white flesh into careful, pregnant woman-sized pieces at Belmont Manor, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The next, her airway closed completely, and the world narrowed to a single desperate thought: I can't breathe, and neither can my baby. Her hand flew to her throat, the universal signal for choking, while her other hand pressed protectively against her 8-month pregnant belly. The baby kicked frantically inside her, sensing her mother's panic through the surge of stress hormones flooding both their systems. Across the white linen tablecloth, her husband Richard Morrison III didn't even look up from his phone. "Natalie, for God's sake," he muttered, his voice carrying that particular tone of embarrassment he'd perfected over their 4-year marriage. "Can you not make a scene? I'm trying to close a deal here." She couldn't answer. Couldn't explain. The scallop had created a complete seal in her trachea, and no air moved in or out. Her face began to flush from exertion, then darkened toward purple as oxygen deprivation set in. "Richard," she tried to mouth, her lips forming his name while her vision started to blur at the edges. Beside him, Vanessa Chen, his executive assistant who'd been joining their dinners with increasing frequency over the past 6 months, laughed. That high, brittle sound that Natalie had learned to hate. "She's so dramatic," Vanessa said, reaching over to touch Richard's arm with perfectly manicured fingers. "Remember last week when she claimed she was too tired to attend your awards dinner? This is the same thing. Attention-seeking behavior." Natalie's chair scraped backward as she stood, instinct taking over. She needed help. She needed air. She needed someone, anyone, to understand that she was dying. The baby kicked harder, a series of frantic movements that felt like tiny fists pounding from the inside. "I'm trying," Natalie thought desperately. "Mama's trying." But Richard finally looked up, and instead of concern, his steel gray eyes held only irritation. "Sit down, Natalie. You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." The restaurant had grown quieter. Other diners were beginning to notice. A woman at a nearby table half stood, her expression alarmed. Natalie stumbled between tables, both hands at her throat now, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward and desperate. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The edges of her vision were going dark, tunneling down to a pinpoint. The baby, her mind screamed. Save the baby. That's when Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Vanessa, moved. Sarah had been dining alone 3 tables away, enjoying a rare evening off from her demanding schedule as chief of emergency medicine at Metropolitan Hospital. At 52, she'd seen enough medical emergencies to recognize the signs of complete airway obstruction instantly. She was behind Natalie in 3 strides, her chair clattering backward with the force of her movement. "Choking victim, 8 months pregnant," Sarah called out with the commanding clarity of someone who'd given orders in trauma bays for 3 decades. "Someone call 911. You," she pointed at a waiter frozen near the kitchen doors, "get the AED and oxygen if you have it." Her arms wrapped around Natalie from behind, positioning carefully to avoid the pregnant belly while her fisted hands found the spot just above Natalie's navel. Modified Heimlich maneuver for a pregnant woman. 5 sharp, upward thrusts. Nothing. Natalie's legs were buckling. Sarah supported her weight, adjusted her grip, tried again. 3 more thrusts, harder this time, her full strength behind the compressions. The scallop shot out of Natalie's mouth and skittered across the marble floor. The first breath came in a horrible, gasping wheeze that sounded like death and life fighting for dominance. The second breath was clearer. The third almost normal. Natalie collapsed forward, would have hit the ground if Sarah hadn't controlled her descent, lowering them both to the floor. Sarah's hand immediately went to Natalie's wrist, counting pulse. Then to her belly, checking for fetal movement. "You're okay," Sarah said firmly. "You're breathing. The baby's moving. You're both going to be okay." Natalie's eyes, wide and terrified and streaming tears, locked onto her husband across the restaurant. Richard stood at their table, his phone still in his hand, his face a mask of profound annoyance. "Really, Natalie?" His voice carried across the now silent dining room. "You couldn't have just drunk some water?" The collective gasp from other diners was audible. The woman who'd half risen earlier covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock. Sarah looked up from her position on the floor, her arms still protectively around Natalie's shoulders. She studied Richard Morrison III, expensive suit, Rolex watch, that particular expression of entitled disdain that she'd seen too many times in her career. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice cold and professional, "your wife just experienced complete airway obstruction. She was approximately 45 seconds from losing consciousness, which would have meant brain damage to both her and your unborn child. She nearly died in front of you." Richard shrugged. "She's fine now. And she's ruined our dinner. Vanessa and I had business to discuss." That's when Natalie understood. Lying on the cold marble floor of Belmont Manor, still struggling to breathe normally, her baby kicking in protest against the trauma, she finally saw with perfect clarity what 4 years of emotional manipulation had hidden from her. Her husband had watched her choke. Had known she was choking, she'd made the universal signal, had stumbled between tables in obvious distress. And he'd done nothing. He'd watched his pregnant wife suffocate and felt only irritation at the inconvenience. The EMTs arrived 7 minutes later. They checked Natalie's vitals, listened to the baby's heartbeat, asked questions about pain and contractions. Sarah stayed beside her the entire time, one hand on Natalie's shoulder, providing the steady presence of someone who actually cared whether she lived or died. "We need to transport her to Metropolitan for evaluation," the lead EMT said. "Choking incidents during pregnancy can trigger labor, and we want to monitor for delayed complications." Richard finally approached, but only close enough to loom over Natalie without actually touching her. "I can't go with you. I have a meeting in the morning that I need to prepare for. Vanessa will drive you home from the hospital." Natalie stared up at him from the stretcher. "Richard, I almost died." "But you didn't," he replied, checking his watch. "And honestly, if you'd just cut your food into smaller pieces like I've told you 1,000 times, none of this would have happened. This is your own fault, Natalie." Sarah stepped between them, her expression arctic. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Dr. Sarachin, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Metropolitan Hospital. Your wife just experienced a life-threatening medical emergency." The appropriate response is concern, not blame. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me how to handle my own wife?" "I'm telling you that your behavior tonight will be documented in her medical records," Sarah said evenly. "Complete with witness statements about your refusal to assist during a choking emergency." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Sarah's voice never rose, but something in her tone made Richard take a step backward. "Your wife's emergency was witnessed by 50 diners, 3 restaurant staff members, and captured on the restaurant's security cameras. When things like this happen, we document everything. For the patient's protection." The EMTs were already wheeling Natalie toward the exit. Sarah followed, leaving Richard standing alone, well, not alone. Vanessa had appeared at his elbow, her expression calculating. "Is that doctor going to be a problem?" Vanessa asked quietly. Richard watched the ambulance doors close. "Natalie's the problem. She's always the problem." In the ambulance, Natalie closed her eyes and felt her baby moving, not the frantic kicks from before, but gentler movements. Reassuring. "Your baby's doing well," Sarah said from the jumper seat beside the stretcher. She'd insisted on riding along. "Heart rate is good. Movement is normal. You both came through this okay?" "My husband." Natalie started, then stopped. What could she even say? That he'd watched her choke? That he'd blamed her for it? That for just a moment, she'd wondered if he'd actually wanted her to die. "Your husband," Sarah said carefully, "is going to be mentioned prominently in my incident report. Along with his companion, who I noticed was wearing quite a lot of his attention." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. Not from the choking, but from the kindness in this stranger's voice. For years with Richard had taught her that kindness was weakness, that needing help was failure, that nearly dying was somehow her own fault for not being more careful. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my baby." "I saved you both," Sarah corrected gently. "And Natalie, I'm going to write down my direct number. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Understand?" At Metropolitan Hospital, they admitted Natalie for overnight observation. The OB team checked her thoroughly, baby's heart rate perfect, no signs of labor, mother recovering well from the trauma but showing elevated stress hormones. "Is someone coming to be with you?" the night nurse asked. "Your husband? Family?" Natalie checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother-in-law, Linda Morrison. 0 from Richard. And 1 text message from Richard that made her hands start to shake. "We need to talk when you get home. This situation has become untenable. V agrees with me that changes need to be made. Don't call. We'll discuss tomorrow. V. Vanessa." The woman who'd laughed while Natalie choked. The woman Richard called about changes that needed to be made. Natalie lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping around her, her hand on her belly where their daughter grew. She'd found out the baby's gender 3 months ago, a girl, which Richard had greeted with visible disappointment because he'd wanted a son to carry on the Morrison name. "I'm alone," she told the nurse quietly. "It's just me and the baby." But that wasn't entirely true. Because Sarachan appeared in the doorway around midnight, still wearing her dinner clothes but carrying a medical bag. "I'm officially consulting on your case," Sarah said. "Which means I have access to your room and the legal authority to make sure you're getting appropriate care." She pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has your husband hurt you before?" The question hung in the air. "Not physically," Natalie said slowly. "He's never hit me." But, Sarah prompted gently. "He tells me I'm stupid. That I'm lucky he married me because no one else would want someone so incompetent. He controls all our money, says I can't be trusted with financial decisions. He reads my texts and emails. He tells me what to wear, what to eat, how to act." Natalie's voice dropped to a whisper. "And lately, he talks about how pregnancy has made me useless. How I'm an embarrassment to him." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression grave. "Natalie, what I'm hearing describes a pattern of emotional and financial abuse. The choking incident tonight was just the first time it became physically visible to witnesses." "But he didn't do anything," Natalie protested weakly. "He just didn't help." Failure to render aid to someone in medical distress when you have the ability to help can be considered negligence, Sarah said. But more importantly, his response, blaming you, showing no concern for you or your baby, leaving you alone in the ambulance, those aren't the actions of a loving husband. Those are the actions of someone who views you as a burden. Natalie felt something crack inside her chest. All the excuses she'd made for Richard over the years. All the times she'd convinced herself that his criticism was meant to help her improve. All the moments she'd blamed herself for not being good enough, smart enough, perfect enough. "He's going to leave me," she whispered. "That text, he's going to divorce me. Probably for Vanessa. Would that be the worst thing?" Sarah asked quietly. Before Natalie could answer, her phone rang. Linda Morrison. At 12:30 a.m. Natalie answered, her voice cautious. "Hello?" "Natalie, darling." Linda's voice was sugar-sweet, which meant something terrible was coming. "Richard just called me with the most distressing news. He says you made a terrible scene at dinner tonight and embarrassed him in front of an important business contact. Is that true?" "I was choking," Natalie said. "I couldn't breathe. A doctor had to perform the Heimlich maneuver. I almost died." "Well, Richard says you were being dramatic." Linda's tone shifted to something harder. "Natalie, you need to understand something. The Morrison family has a reputation to maintain. Richard has worked very hard to build his position in this community. When you do things that draw negative attention, I was literally choking to death. Richard says you could have handled it more discreetly. Linda continued as if Natalie hadn't spoken. And darling, I'm calling to give you some advice. Richard is considering making some changes to your marriage arrangement. If you want to remain Mrs. Richard Morrison III, you need to start being more supportive and less needy. Sarah was watching Natalie's face, reading the conversation from her expressions. What kind of changes? Natalie asked, though she already knew. He's drafting divorce papers, Linda said, dropping the pretense of kindness. You'll be served tomorrow. If you're smart, you'll sign without making trouble. The prenup you signed is very clear, you get nothing except what Richard chooses to give you out of the goodness of his heart. The line went dead. Natalie set down the phone with trembling hands. She says there's a prenup. That I'll get nothing. Sarah leaned forward. Natalie, did you sign a prenup? I don't know. Richard had me sign so many papers when we got married. He said it was all standard marriage license stuff. Do you have copies? Richard keeps all our important documents. He says I'm too disorganized to be trusted with paperwork. Sarah's expression darkened. Natalie, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you're describing sounds like financial exploitation and document fraud. No legitimate prenup is signed without each party having independent legal counsel review it. And if you don't even remember signing one, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Chen? There's someone here asking about Mrs. Morrison. Says he's her husband and he's demanding we release her tonight. Sarah stood, her expression shifting to something cold and professional. Tell Mr. Morrison that his wife is under medical observation for complications from a choking incident and fetal distress. She cannot be released until morning at the earliest, and only with my direct authorization as the attending physician. He's insisting, he can insist all he wants. This is my hospital, my patient, and my medical decision. If he continues to cause a disruption, call security. The nurse nodded and disappeared. He's going to be furious, Natalie whispered. Let him be furious. Sarah sat back down. Natalie, you need to understand something. The moment Richard left you on that restaurant floor, the moment he prioritized his dinner companion over his choking wife, he revealed who he really is. Tomorrow he's going to serve you divorce papers and try to leave you with nothing. But here's what he doesn't know. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened a file. Your choking incident tonight was witnessed by 52 people. I have their names, the restaurant gave them to me as part of the medical documentation. That's 52 potential witnesses who can testify that your husband refused to help you during a life-threatening emergency. That's powerful evidence of his character. She scrolled to another screen. I'm also putting you in touch with Margaret Hale, the best family law attorney in the state. She specializes in cases where one spouse has been financially and emotionally abused. And Natalie, Sarah's eyes held hers, she wins. Every time. I can't afford an attorney, Natalie said. Richard controls everything. Margaret takes cases pro bono when the circumstances warrant it. Sarah smiled slightly. And trust me, your circumstances warrant it. Natalie wanted to believe her. Wanted to imagine a world where Richard didn't win, where she wasn't left with nothing, where her daughter grew up safe and protected. But 4 years of conditioning was hard to overcome. What if he's right, she whispered. What if I am useless without him? Sarah reached over and gently took Natalie's hand. You're a doctor yourself, aren't you? I saw your hospital badge when they brought in your belongings. Dr. Natalie Morrison, Pediatrics. Natalie nodded. I haven't worked in 2 years. Richard said it was inappropriate for his wife to work. That it made him look like he couldn't provide for his family. So he isolated you from your profession, your income, and your identity. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Natalie, that's textbook abuse. And tomorrow, when he serves those divorce papers, we're going to fight back. Not with anger, not with drama, but with evidence, documentation, and the legal system. I don't have anything, Natalie said. No money, no documents, no proof of anything. You have 52 witnesses who watched your husband abandon you while you choked, Sarah replied. You have security footage from one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. You have medical documentation of the incident. And you have me, a doctor who's prepared to testify about what I witnessed. She pulled a business card from her pocket and pressed it into Natalie's hand. But there's something else you should know. Something I haven't told you yet. Natalie looked at the card. Then back at Sarah's face. Your mother, Sarah said quietly, was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. She worked at this hospital 30 years ago. We were colleagues and friends before she left medicine to pursue other interests. The room seemed to tilt. You knew my mother? I knew her very well. Sarah's expression was complex, grief and pride and something that looked like long-held secrets finally surfacing. And Natalie, there are things about your mother that you need to know. Things that will change everything. Before Natalie could respond, her phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was a law firm she'd never heard of, Whitmore & Associates. The subject line made her blood run cold, Estate of Elizabeth Morrison, urgent time-sensitive documents. Sarah leaned over to see the screen. Then she smiled, not a happy smile, but something knowing and slightly fierce. Open it, she said. Your mother's been waiting 4 years for this moment. Natalie's finger hovered over the screen. In that moment, lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying, with her husband preparing to divorce her and leave her with nothing, she understood that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. She opened the email. And everything her husband thought he knew about powerlessness and control began to crumble. Richard arrived at the hospital at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing his serious business expression. Vanessa walked beside him, dressed in a crisp white blouse and pencil skirt that seemed designed to contrast with Natalie's hospital gown and disheveled appearance. They found Natalie sitting up in bed, her breakfast tray untouched, her phone in her hands. She looked up when they entered, and Richard was momentarily surprised by her expression. Instead of the usual anxiety or eagerness to please, she looked calm. Almost serene. Natalie, he began, using his boardroom voice. I'm glad you're feeling better. We have some things to discuss. I'm sure we do. Natalie set down her phone carefully. Richard pulled 2 chairs close to the bed and gestured for Vanessa to sit. The intimacy of the gesture, treating Vanessa as an equal partner in this conversation about his marriage, wasn't lost on anyone in the room. I've had my attorney draw up divorce papers, Richard said, pulling documents from the portfolio. Given the circumstances, I think we both know this marriage isn't working. You've become increasingly unstable, I choked on my food. And I can't continue to be responsible for your emotional fragility and public embarrassments. Richard continued as if she hadn't spoken. The prenup you signed is very clear about asset distribution. You'll receive a modest settlement, enough to get you started somewhere else, but obviously the house, the cars, the investments, all stay with me. He slid the papers across the bed. If you sign today, I'm willing to increase the settlement by $50,000. That should be more than enough for someone with your limited means. Vanessa leaned forward, her expression sympathetic in a way that made Natalie want to laugh. Nat, can I call you Nat? I know this is hard. But Richard and I have been talking, and we think this is really what's best for everyone. You'll be free to find someone more suited to your personality. Someone who doesn't mind the drama. The drama, Natalie repeated quietly. The choking thing last night, for example. Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. I know you said you couldn't breathe, but it looked like you were really playing it up for attention. The way you stumbled around between tables, the hand-waving, the facial expressions, it all seemed very performed. Richard nodded. That's exactly what concerned me. Your need for attention has become pathological, Natalie. It's embarrassing. Natalie looked down at the divorce papers. The settlement amount listed was $75,000, barely enough to cover a year's rent in the city. No spousal support. No shared assets. Nothing. Where do I sign? She asked. Richard blinked, clearly expecting more resistance. Really? You're going to be reasonable about this. You want a divorce. Natalie's voice was steady. I can't stop you from wanting a divorce. So where do I sign? Richard pulled a pen from his jacket and handed it to her. Vanessa smiled and squeezed his arm. Natalie held the pen, poised over the signature line. Then she looked up. Before I sign, I need to ask you something, Richard. Last night, when I was choking, and I was genuinely choking, the medical records confirm complete airway obstruction. Why didn't you help me? I've already explained. No, I need to understand. Natalie's eyes held his. I was carrying your daughter. I was your wife. I was dying in front of you. And you did nothing. Not even calling 911. Why? Richard shifted uncomfortably. I thought you were being dramatic. But I'd made the universal sign for choking. I was turning purple. Other people knew immediately that I needed help. Why didn't you? Because you're always making scenes. Richard's voice rose. Always needing something, always demanding attention. How was I supposed to know this time was real? So you'd rather risk me dying than risk being wrong about me seeking attention. The words hung in the air. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. Well, Richard said, you didn't die, so I don't see how it's relevant. That's when the hospital room door opened. Sarah Chen entered, followed by a woman in an elegant gray suit carrying a briefcase. Margaret Hale moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd won hundreds of cases and lost very few. Mr. Morrison, Margaret said pleasantly. I'm Margaret Hale, and I represent Mrs. Morrison in all legal matters. I understand you're attempting to have her sign divorce documents. Richard's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. This is a private conversation. Actually, any conversation involving legal documents requires both parties to have representation present. Margaret walked to the opposite side of the bed from Richard and Vanessa. Especially when those documents are being presented to a patient recovering from a medical emergency that her husband failed to address. I don't need to listen to this. Richard stood. Natalie, you have until 5 p.m. to sign those papers and take the settlement. After that, the offer drops to the minimum required by law. Oh, I don't think so. Margaret opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. Mr. Morrison, are you aware that presenting divorce papers for signature without allowing the other party adequate time for legal review is considered coercion under family law? Especially when presented in a medical facility to a patient who's been under treatment for less than 24 hours. She pulled out several documents and spread them on the bedside table. I'm also filing an emergency motion to freeze all joint assets pending a full forensic audit of the Morrison family finances. Standard procedure in cases where there's concern about asset hiding or financial abuse. Richard's face went red. You can't do that. I already did. The motion was filed at 8:45 this morning and was granted by Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to you. I checked, at 8:52. Margaret smiled. Every bank account, investment portfolio, and real estate holding in your name or jointly held with your wife is now frozen pending review. Vanessa grabbed Richard's arm. Richard, what is she talking about? She's bluffing, Richard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Margaret pulled out another document. I'm also filing a formal complaint with the medical board regarding your behavior during your wife's medical emergency. Dr. Chen has provided a detailed incident report, and we have 52 witness statements from other diners. The board takes very seriously cases where medical professionals, and yes, your wife is a licensed physician even if you forbade her to practice, are abandoned during emergencies by their spouses. I'm not a medical professional, Richard protested. But you were in a position to render aid or call for help, and you did neither. Sarah stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, I'm also recommending to the hospital board that you be banned from Metropolitan Hospital pending the outcome of the investigation. You don't deserve to walk these halls. Richard's hands clenched into fists. You can't do this. I'm Richard Morrison III. My family has donated millions to this hospital. And we're grateful for those donations, Sarah said. But money doesn't buy the right to watch your pregnant wife choke to death without trying to help. Natalie watched the exchange with a strange sense of detachment. This was really happening. These women, strangers who'd appeared in her life less than 24 hours ago, were fighting for her in ways she'd never fought for herself. Margaret turned to Natalie. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to ask you not to sign anything today. In fact, I'm going to ask you not to sign anything that hasn't been reviewed by me personally. Can you agree to that? Natalie looked down at the divorce papers. At the $75,000 settlement that was supposed to represent 4 years of her life. At the signature line where Richard wanted her name. She picked up the papers and slowly, deliberately, tore them in half. I think I need time to consider my options, she said quietly. Richard's face went from red to purple. You're making a mistake. My attorneys will destroy you. Your attorneys, Margaret said pleasantly, will find themselves up against a case built on 52 witness statements, security camera footage, medical records documenting abandonment, and financial records showing systematic control and isolation. How do you think that's going to play in court, Mr. Morrison? She paused. Especially once we add in the documentation from your wife's late mother's estate. Richard froze. What? Margaret glanced at Natalie, who nodded slowly. Oh, didn't you know? Margaret said. Mrs. Morrison's mother, Elizabeth Morrison, passed away 3 years ago. But before she died, she established a trust for her daughter. A rather substantial trust, actually. One that includes some very interesting assets. Natalie's mother was a failed doctor, Richard scoffed. She had nothing. On the contrary. Margaret pulled out another document. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison was a successful emergency physician who invested wisely over 3 decades. When she passed, she left her daughter controlling shares in several medical facilities, including. She paused for effect. Metropolitan Hospital. The room went silent. Sarah was smiling now. Natalie, did you know your mother left you 45% ownership of this hospital? Natalie shook her head, still processing the information from the email she'd read late last night. Well, she did. Sarah pulled up a chair beside the bed. Your mother and I worked together for years. When she left clinical medicine, she went into hospital administration and medical investment. She was brilliant at it. And she structured everything so that upon her death, all her holdings would transfer to you in trust, managed by advisors until you were ready to take control. Margaret added, the trust terms specify that full control transfers to you upon divorce, death of a spouse, or medical emergency requiring hospitalization. Last night's choking incident triggered the final clause. She turned to Richard. Which means, Mr. Morrison, that your wife is now the primary shareholder of this hospital, along with controlling interests in 3 urgent care centers, a medical supply company, and a pharmaceutical distribution firm. Total estimated value, $1. $2 billion. Richard's mouth opened and closed. Vanessa's hand slipped from his arm. That's impossible, Richard managed. I would have known. Your wife didn't even know, Sarah pointed out. Elizabeth Morrison was very good at keeping her wealth private. She'd seen too many cases where family members exploited medical professionals for their money. So she created an ironclad trust structure that couldn't be touched by anyone, not you, not your prenup, not even Natalie herself until the conditions were met. Margaret organized her documents with practiced efficiency. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to give you some free legal advice. Go home. Hire a very good attorney, not the family lawyer who drafted that laughable prenup. Prepare for a lengthy, expensive, and very public divorce proceeding. Because your wife isn't signing anything except a counterpetition that will take every cent you tried to hide. She smiled. Oh, and Mr. Morrison? That mansion you insisted Natalie's mother purchase for you as a wedding present? The deed is in the trust. It's never been yours. You've been living in your wife's house for 4 years. Richard stumbled backward. His carefully constructed world, the one where he controlled everything, where Natalie was weak and dependent, where his word was law, was collapsing. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking. "Oh, it's over," Natalie said softly. "You just don't know it yet." Richard and Vanessa left without another word. The sound of their retreat, rapid footsteps, Vanessa's high heels clicking frantically, was almost comical. When the door closed, Natalie felt something release in her chest. For years of holding her breath, of making herself small, of apologizing for existing. "Did that really just happen?" she whispered. "That really just happened." Sarah pulled out her phone. "And I recorded the entire conversation, which is legal in this state as long as one party consents. That's now evidence of attempted coercion." Margaret sat down with a satisfied expression. "Natalie, your mother was one of the smartest women I ever met. She knew exactly what kind of man Richard was the moment she met him. And she spent your entire marriage building protections you didn't even know existed." She opened a folder and removed a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. "Your mother left this for you. She asked me to give it to you when the time came." Margaret's voice gentled. "I think now is the time." The man who claimed to be James Morrison stood in the hospital doorway with tears streaming down his weathered face, his hands trembling as he looked at the daughter he'd abandoned 16 years ago. Natalie couldn't breathe, not from choking this time, but from the impossibility of what she was seeing. "Dad?" The word came out broken, disbelieving. "It's me, sweetheart." His voice was exactly as she remembered. That slight rasp from years of smoking he'd quit when she was 10. The way he drew out the word sweetheart like it had 3 syllables. Margaret stepped between them, her lawyer instincts on high alert. "Mr. Morrison, or whoever you are, you need to provide identification and an explanation. Right now." James pulled out a wallet and removed a driver's license. "Maryland. Issued to James Edward Morrison." The photo matched his face. "I was in witness protection," he said quietly. "For 16 years. And the only reason I'm here now is because your mother's death released me from the agreement." Sarah moved closer, studying his face with a physician's attention to detail. "Elizabeth knew you were alive? She's the one who helped me disappear." James sank into a chair, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "May I explain?" "Please. Natalie deserves to know the truth." Natalie nodded numbly. Margaret positioned herself protectively at her side. James took a deep breath. "In 2009, I was the chief financial officer at Morrison Medical Group, a chain of private hospitals my family had owned for 3 generations. What I didn't know was that my brother, Michael, and my father had been committing massive Medicare fraud for years. Billing for procedures never performed, kickbacks to physicians, falsified records. Millions of dollars." He looked directly at Natalie. "When I discovered it, I had a choice. Cover it up and protect the family business, or turn them in. I chose to report them to federal authorities. I wore a wire for 6 months, gathering evidence. And they found out," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "They found out." James's voice hardened. "The night before I was scheduled to testify before a grand jury, someone ran me off the road. My car went into the Chesapeake Bay. The police found it 3 days later, burned out, unidentifiable body inside. They assumed it was me." Natalie's hands covered her mouth. "But it wasn't. It was a federal agent who looked enough like me to work as a double. He'd volunteered for the assignment." James's voice cracked. "He had no family. No one to miss him. And I had to let the world think I was dead so the investigation could continue and so you and your mother would be safe." "Mom knew?" Natalie whispered. "Your mother was the one who convinced me to do it." James pulled out a faded photograph. Natalie recognized it as one that had been on her mother's nightstand for years. "She said that you were strong enough to survive losing me for a while, but you wouldn't survive what Michael and my father would do to you if they knew I was cooperating with federal authorities. They'd already threatened both of you." Margaret was taking notes rapidly. Where's Michael Morrison now? Federal prison. 15 years for Medicare fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. My father died in prison. Most of the Morrison Medical Group assets were seized. James looked at Natalie with devastating sadness. Your mother took what was left, the few facilities that weren't implicated in the fraud, and rebuilt them into something legitimate. That's where her fortune came from. She turned our family's criminal enterprise into something that actually helped people. Sarah nodded slowly. Elizabeth never told me the full story. She just said she'd left the Morrison family business and wanted nothing to do with that name. She protected you, James said to Natalie. From all of it. She made sure you grew up as far from the Morrison name as possible, which is why she used her maiden name professionally. And when you married Richard Morrison, no relation to my family, we checked, she nearly told you everything. But she was already sick by then. The cancer was aggressive. He pulled out another document. Before she died, she contacted me through our FBI handler. She told me about Richard, about what she suspected he was doing to you. And she made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, if you were ever in danger, I would come out of witness protection to help you. But the danger was last night, Margaret said. Why are you here now? Because when Dr. Chen filed her incident report about the choking, it triggered an alert in the Federal Witness Protection Database. James looked at Sarah. You noted in your report that Natalie's husband, Richard Morrison III, had deliberately failed to render aid during a medical emergency. That specific phrasing, deliberately failed to render aid, was a code Elizabeth set up with the U.S. Marshals. It meant Natalie was in immediate danger from her spouse. Sarah's eyes widened. Elizabeth set up a code word system with witness protection? She set up everything. James smiled sadly. Your mother was the most thorough person I ever met. She knew that if Richard ever crossed the line from emotional abuse to actual life-threatening endangerment, we'd need federal resources to protect you. The moment Dr. Chen filed that report, U.S. Marshals contacted me in Maryland. They offered me a choice, stay in protection or come help my daughter. There was no choice. Natalie felt 16 years of grief and anger and loss swirling inside her. You let me think you were dead. I mourned you. I went to therapy for years because of survivor's guilt. And all that time, you were alive? I know. James's voice broke completely. Natalie, I know. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. But right now, I need you to understand something. Your mother's trust, the fortune she left you, the protections she built, they were all designed with the knowledge that one day you might need to fight someone powerful. She and I planned it together. He pulled out a flash drive. This contains 16 years of documentation. Every time Richard isolated you from friends, every time he controlled your finances, every pattern of abuse, your mother documented all of it. She had investigators following him for years. She knew about Vanessa long before you did. Margaret took the flash drive like it was made of gold. This is admissible in court? All of it. Licensed investigators, proper documentation, clean chain of custody. Elizabeth made sure. James turned back to Natalie. Your mother knew she was dying. She knew she couldn't protect you herself. So she built an army of protections that would activate the moment you needed them. Dr. Chen, Margaret Hale, the trust structure, the evidence, and me. Natalie looked at her father, this stranger who was somehow the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd been dead for 16 years but was now sitting 3 feet away. I don't know how to process this, she whispered. You don't have to process it right now, Sarah said gently. Right now, you need to rest. You're 8 months pregnant, you survived a choking incident 12 hours ago, and you've just discovered your father is alive. That's enough trauma for one day. James stood carefully, like he was afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile moment. Natalie, I'm staying at the Riverside Hotel. Room 412. When you're ready to talk, if you're ever ready, I'll be there. No pressure. No expectations. Just, I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Your mother asked me to give you this when the time came. Inside was a necklace, a simple gold chain with a medical caduceus pendant. Natalie recognized it instantly. Her mother had worn it every day of her professional life. She wanted you to have it, James said. She wanted you to remember that you're a doctor. That you're capable and strong and skilled. That Richard's voice telling you otherwise was always a lie. He left before Natalie could respond. The door closed softly behind him. Margaret spoke first. Well, that was unexpected. Unexpected? Sarah laughed without humor. That was impossible. Except it's real, and it changes everything. Natalie touched the necklace, feeling the weight of her mother's legacy. How does it change things? Because now we have 16 years of documented abuse, federal witness protection resources, and a father who's willing to testify about everything your mother discovered. Margaret's expression was fierce. Natalie, we weren't just going to win your divorce case. We're going to destroy Richard so completely that he'll wish he'd helped you when you were choking. Week 1, survival and discovery. The hotel room Margaret had arranged was in a boutique property on the west side, far from Richard's usual haunts, close to the hospital, and secure enough that Natalie could breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. Mrs. Chen, Sarah's mother, who'd insisted on helping, had stocked the mini kitchen with healthy food for pregnancy. Sarah visited twice a day to check on the baby. Margaret came by every evening with legal updates and strategic plans. And James sat in the lobby every morning, reading a newspaper, not pushing for contact but making it clear he was available whenever Natalie was ready. It took 3 days. On the third morning, Natalie came down to the lobby at 6 a.m., unable to sleep, her daughter doing gymnastics inside her. James looked up from his newspaper and simply nodded at the empty chair beside him. She sat. They didn't speak for 10 minutes. Just sat together watching the sunrise through the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows. Finally, Natalie said, "Tell me about Mom. The parts one don't know." James set down his newspaper. "Your mother was the strongest person I ever met. When I told her about the Medicare fraud, about what my family had done, she didn't hesitate. She said we were going to report it, consequences be damned. And when the threats started, when it became clear that my testimony would put all of us in danger, she was the one who contacted the FBI. She protected me," Natalie said quietly. "She protected us both. The day I died, she held it together through the funeral, through your grief, through everything. But at night, when you were asleep, she'd call me on a secure line and we'd talk for hours. About you. About how you were coping. About what she was building to protect you." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Elizabeth Morrison, 10 years ago, smiling at the camera with that mix of warmth and steel that Natalie remembered so well. "She was diagnosed with cancer 3 years after I entered witness protection," James continued. "She called me immediately. Said she had 2 years, maybe 3, to build something that would outlast her. Something that would protect you when she couldn't. The trust," Natalie said. "The trust was just the beginning. She created a network. Dr. Chen became her eyes in the hospital. She'd watch for signs that Richard was isolating you from your medical career. Margaret Hale was recruited to handle the legal structure. Private investigators documented everything. And she set up the trigger system so that if Richard ever put your life in danger, I'd be activated like some kind of sleeper agent." Despite everything, Natalie smiled slightly. "Mom always did think like a chess player. 12 moves ahead, always." James's expression grew serious. "Natalie, there's something else you need to know. Trust isn't just money. Your mother bought controlling interest in Metropolitan Hospital specifically because she knew you'd eventually need a safe place, somewhere Richard's influence couldn't reach. She also purchased 3 women's shelters, a legal aid clinic, and a foundation for abuse survivors." Natalie's breath caught. "Why?" Because she knew that once you escaped Richard, you'd want to help others do the same. She knew you, sweetheart. She knew that your first instinct after survival would be to protect other women from experiencing what you went through. The baby kicked hard, as if agreeing. I need to see the full documentation, Natalie said. Everything Mom left. I need to understand what I'm working with. Margaret has it all organized, James replied. When you're ready, she'll walk you through every asset, every protection, every weapon your mother built into the system. I'm ready now. That afternoon, Margaret arrived with 3 banker's boxes full of files. She spread documents across the hotel room's desk like a general planning a campaign. Your mother's estate is worth $1. $2 billion, Margaret began. But it's not just cash. It's strategic assets designed to give you power and protection. Let's start with the medical holdings. She pulled out a portfolio. Metropolitan Hospital, you own 45% controlling shares. 3 urgent care centers in surrounding counties. A medical supply company that services hospitals throughout the state. A pharmaceutical distribution firm with contracts worth $200 million annually. Next folder. Real estate. The house Richard thinks is his, yours, held in trust since before your wedding. A condo in Miami that generates $8,000 per month in rental income. Commercial properties in 3 cities, all leased to medical practices. Total value, $47 million. Third folder. Investments. Your mother was brilliant at this. She bought shares in tech companies before they went public, invested in biotech startups, created a portfolio that has generated an average annual return of 18% for 15 years. Current value, $680 million. Natalie stared at the numbers. This can't be real. It's very real. And it's all structured so Richard can't touch a penny of it. Margaret pulled out the final, thickest folder. Now, this is the important part. The justice protocol. The what? Your mother created a step-by-step plan for handling your divorce. She called it the justice protocol. Margaret opened the folder to reveal a handwritten letter in Elizabeth's precise script. Natalie, if you're reading this, it means Richard has shown his true nature. Good. Now we can work with the truth instead of pretending. The Justice Protocol has 3 phases. Phase 1, survival and safety, weeks 1 to 2, get out. Get safe. Let Margaret handle all legal communications. Focus on your health and the baby. Don't engage with Richard, his family, or Vanessa. Build your strength. Phase 2, strategic positioning, weeks 3 to 6, this is where you start becoming visible again. Not as Richard's wife, but as Dr. Natalie Morrison. Accept board positions I've arranged for you at the hospital and medical charities. Make donations. Let people see you, transformed, powerful, unbothered. Let Richard's world start to whisper about where you went and who you've become. Phase 3, the reckoning, weeks 7 to 8, Richard will make mistakes. Angry men always do. Document everything. And when he's at his most comfortable, probably at some public event where he'll try to flaunt his new life with Vanessa, that's when you strike with every piece of evidence, every documentation, every witness. Not in anger. In precision. Remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. It's about showing your daughter that women who are underestimated become the most dangerous opponents. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm watching from wherever mothers go to watch their daughters win. Mom Natalie read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had planned this years ago. Had known exactly how Richard would behave, exactly what Natalie would need, exactly how to guide her from victim to victor. Phase 1 started the night you were admitted, Margaret said gently. We're currently in week 1. You have 1 more week of pure rest and recovery. Then we start phase 2, your public transformation. I'm 8 months pregnant, Natalie protested. I can barely move without getting winded. Sarah, who'd arrived during Margaret's presentation, smiled. Which is why your transformation won't be physical at first. It'll be strategic. We're going to make Richard watch as his weak, dependent wife becomes someone he doesn't recognize. James added from his position by the window, your mother left detailed instructions. Board meeting schedules, charity events, strategic introductions. She even picked out your wardrobe for the first 6 public appearances. She picked out my clothes? 3 years ago. Margaret pulled out a garment bag. She updated them annually based on fashion trends. These are from last year, tailored for late-stage pregnancy. They're in the closet at your house, the one Richard can't access anymore because we got the restraining order and property order approved. Natalie looked at the garment bag, then at the justice protocol letter, then at the 3 people who'd become her unlikely team. Okay, she said quietly. Tell me exactly what Mom planned for Phase 2. Week 2, Education and Team Assembly. Margaret arranged for Natalie to be discharged from the hotel's watchful proximity and moved into her mother's former penthouse apartment, a space Natalie hadn't even known existed. It occupied the entire top floor of a building 3 blocks from Metropolitan Hospital, with panoramic city views and security that would make a fortress jealous. Your mother bought this 10 years ago, James explained as he helped her settle in. She never told you because Richard monitored your conversations and finances. She didn't want him knowing about any assets he might try to claim. The apartment was furnished but felt unlived in, like a stage set waiting for its actor. Except for one room. Mom's office, Natalie whispered, standing in the doorway. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held medical journals, business texts, and legal references. The desk was mahogany, massive, commanding. And on the wall behind it hung a series of framed photographs, Elizabeth Morrison receiving her medical degree. Elizabeth Morrison shaking hands with the hospital board president. Elizabeth Morrison at various charity galas, always in control, always powerful. And in the center, a photo of Natalie at her own medical school graduation, Elizabeth standing beside her with fierce pride in her eyes. She wanted you to work from here, James said quietly. To sit at her desk and feel her presence while you plan Richard's downfall. Natalie moved behind the desk, sank into the leather chair. It fit perfectly, like her mother had measured her before ordering it. On the desk sat a laptop, brand new. And beside it, a note in Elizabeth's handwriting, "Welcome to the war room, Dr. Morrison. Use it well." Over the next week, that office became Natalie's command center. Margaret came daily, teaching her the intricacies of trust law, asset protection, and divorce strategy. Richard's attorneys are already filing motions, Margaret explained, spreading documents across the desk. They're claiming you're mentally unstable, that the choking incident was fabricated, that you're unfit to raise a child. Can they do that? They can try. But we have 52 witnesses, security footage, and my incident report, Sarah said. She'd started joining the strategy sessions, her medical expertise proving invaluable. No judge will believe you faked complete airway obstruction severe enough to require emergency intervention. What about custody? Natalie's hand moved protectively to her belly. That's where your mother's planning really shines. Margaret pulled up a new document. We're not just defending against Richard's custody claims. We're going on offense. I'm filing for sole custody with supervised visitation only, citing his failure to render aid during your medical emergency, his pattern of emotional abuse documented over 4 years, and his relationship with Vanessa, which constitutes adultery under state law. Adultery matters? In custody cases? Absolutely. A parent who prioritizes an affair partner over their spouse's life-threatening emergency is demonstrating profoundly poor judgment. Margaret smiled grimly. We're painting Richard as not just a bad husband, but a dangerous father. Sarah added, I'm also preparing an expert witness testimony about the psychological impact of having a parent who fails to protect you in crisis. The fact that Richard watched you choke, watched his unborn daughter face potential brain damage from oxygen deprivation, and did nothing? That's grounds for serious custody restrictions. He'll fight this, Natalie said. Of course he will. which is why we're building an absolutely airtight case. Margaret pulled out another folder, this one labeled evidence package. Inside were transcripts. Hundreds of pages of transcripts. Your mother's investigators recorded every conversation they could legally capture, Margaret explained. Richard talking to business associates about how he got stuck with a useless wife. Vanessa laughing about how easy it is to manipulate doctors, they're so naive about real-world power. Linda Morrison telling her bridge club that Richard should have married someone from a better family with actual connections. Natalie flipped through pages, seeing her marriage dissected in her husband's own words. Each comment was dated, time-stamped, and witnessed by licensed investigators. This is 4 years of documentation, she whispered. 4 years of evidence that this wasn't a sudden breakdown of your marriage, Margaret confirmed. This was systematic, calculated undermining of your self-worth and independence. That matters in court. James, who'd been quiet during most of the legal discussions, spoke up. There's one more thing your mother arranged. She called it your board of directors. My what? People she hand-selected to help you through this transition. Dr. Chin you already know. Margaret is your legal counsel. I'm your father, for whatever that's worth now. He smiled sadly. But there are others. He pulled out his phone and made a call. We're ready. Over the next hour, 3 more people arrived at the penthouse. First was Dr. Catherine Zhao, a financial advisor who'd managed Elizabeth's investments for 15 years. At 43, she had the sharp eyes of someone who'd built fortunes and destroyed fraudulent schemes with equal efficiency. Your mother taught me everything I know about medical investing, Catherine said, shaking Natalie's hand. Now I'm going to teach you. By the end of this month, you'll understand every asset in your portfolio and exactly how to use financial leverage in your divorce. Second was Marcus Reed, a private investigator who'd been documenting Richard's activities for 3 years. At 55, he was ex-FBI, methodical, and relentless. I have 847 hours of surveillance footage, Marcus said, dropping a hard drive on the desk. Richard meeting Vanessa at hotels, restaurants, her apartment. Financial records showing he's been funding her lifestyle with joint account money, your money. And communications that prove they've been planning your divorce for at least 8 months. 8 months? Natalie's voice cracked. I was 6 months pregnant when they started planning to leave me. 6 months pregnant and, according to Richard's texts, increasingly unattractive and demanding. Marcus's expression was disgusted. Your mother suspected the affair would escalate during pregnancy. She was right. The third arrival was unexpected, a young woman, maybe 28, with nervous energy and determination in her eyes. I'm Jennifer Cole, she said. I'm the first Mrs. Richard Morrison. The room went silent. Natalie stared. Richard was married before? For 18 months, 5 years ago. He was 29, I was 23, and I thought I'd found my fairy tale. Jennifer's laugh was bitter. Instead I found a man who controlled every aspect of my life, isolated me from my friends and family, and ultimately filed for divorce when I couldn't get pregnant fast enough for his timeline. He divorced you for not getting pregnant, Natalie said slowly. His exact words were, what good is a wife who can't produce an heir? Jennifer pulled out a folder. Your mother found me 2 years ago. She said one day I might be able to help Richard's next wife. I've been waiting for that day. Margaret took the folder. This is your divorce file? Everything. Including the parts his lawyers tried to seal. The psychological evaluation that showed patterns of emotional abuse. The financial records showing he tried to hide assets during discovery. The testimony from my therapist about the trauma his behavior caused. Jennifer looked at Natalie. Your mother said Richard would eventually hurt another woman. She wanted to make sure that woman had ammunition to fight back. Natalie felt something shift inside her. Her mother hadn't just protected her. She'd built an entire network of protection. Why are you all doing this? She asked quietly. Helping me? Catherine answered first. Because your mother saved my career when I was about to lose it to a sexual harassment scandal. She testified on my behalf, risked her own reputation, and made sure justice was served. Marcus added, because Elizabeth Morrison hired me when no one else would. I'd been fired from the FBI for refusing to ignore evidence in a case involving a senator's son. She said integrity shouldn't be punished. She gave me a career. Jennifer said simply, because she listened when I said Richard was dangerous. When his lawyers were calling me a liar, when his family was threatening to sue me for defamation, Elizabeth Morrison believed me. And she used her resources to make sure I was protected during my divorce. Now it's my turn to help you. Sarah spoke last. Because Elizabeth Morrison was my best friend for 30 years. We went to medical school together. When I was assaulted by a superior during my residency, she's the one who stood beside me through the investigation. When I thought I'd have to give up medicine, she helped me fight back. And before she died, she made me promise that if Richard ever showed his true colors, I'd be there for her daughter the way she'd been there for me. James cleared his throat. Your mother built an army, Natalie. Not with weapons, but with loyalty. Everyone in this room owes her something. And we're all here to make sure you survive what she knew was coming. Natalie looked around at these people, strangers a week ago, her mother's secret. You look like your mother, James said quietly from the doorway. The first time I saw her in a boardroom. Absolutely formidable. The Metropolitan Hospital Board met in a conference room on the 12th floor. As Natalie entered, escorted by Sarah, with Margaret and James trailing as advisors, every head turned. Board President Michael Chen, no relation to Sarah, despite sharing a surname, stood immediately. Dr. Morrison. We're honored to have you join us. Your mother's presence at these meetings is deeply missed. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'm honored to continue her legacy. Natalie took her seat, her mother's seat, at the large table. The nameplate had already been changed to Dr. Natalie Morrison. The meeting proceeded normally for 40 minutes. Budget discussions, facility updates, strategic planning. Natalie listened, absorbing information, occasionally asking quiet questions that demonstrated competence rather than ignorance. Then came new business. There's been a request, Michael Chen said carefully, from Richard Morrison III. He's asking to be added to our preferred vendor list for marketing consultancy services. The room went very quiet. Several board members glanced at Natalie. Mr. Morrison is my estranged husband, Natalie said calmly. We're currently in divorce proceedings. I'll recuse myself from this discussion. That won't be necessary, said Elizabeth Grant, the hospital's CFO. A woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharper eyes. Dr. Morrison, your mother built this hospital's reputation on strict ethical standards. One of those standards is that we don't do business with individuals who have documented patterns of unethical behavior. She pulled out a file. Mr. Richard Morrison III has 3 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau for deceptive marketing practices. His company has been sued twice for breach of contract. And there's a pending investigation from the State Attorney General's office regarding his firm's billing practices. Natalie hadn't known any of this. Neither, based on their expressions, had most of the board. Additionally, Elizabeth continued, given the circumstances of Dr. Morrison's recent medical emergency and her husband's documented failure to render aid, the hospital's legal counsel has advised against any business relationship that could be perceived as giving preferential treatment to someone who endangered a hospital board member's life. Michael Chen nodded. The motion to add Morrison Consulting to our vendor list is denied. He looked at Natalie. Dr. Morrison, I apologize that you had to hear about this request at all. It was inappropriate. I appreciate the board's diligence, Natalie said quietly. After the meeting, 3 board members approached her. Then 5. Then 8. By the time she left, she had invitations to 2 charity galas, a women's health initiative, and a hospital fundraising committee. Your mother built you a platform, Sarah said in the car. Every person in that room owes their position to Elizabeth Morrison's vision for this hospital. They're not going to side with Richard. Did you know about his business problems? Natalie asked. Your mother documented everything, Marcus replied from the driver's seat. He'd become Natalie's unofficial security, insisting on driving her to all public appearances. Richard's company is failing. He's $200,000 in debt, has maxed out 3 credit cards, and is behind on office rent. That's why he wanted the divorce. He planned to take your settlement and use it to save his business. But there is no settlement, Margaret said with satisfaction. Just the $1. $2 billion trust he can't touch in the house he's being evicted from next week. Natalie's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I saw you at the board meeting. You looked good. We should talk. Margaret grabbed the phone. Don't respond. Every communication goes through me. She typed a reply. All communications regarding Mr. and Mrs. Morrison's divorce must go through legal counsel. This number will be blocked. Margaret Hale, attorney at law. Within seconds, her phone rang. Margaret answered on speaker. This is absurd. Richard's voice filled the car. I just want to talk to my wife. Your wife, Margaret said coldly, is my client. And you are the respondent in divorce proceedings that include allegations of domestic endangerment and emotional abuse. You are prohibited from direct contact per the restraining order issued last week. I never received a restraining order. It was served to your business address at 2:47 p.m. last Thursday. Your assistant Vanessa Chen signed for it. Check your mail, Mr. Morrison. There was a pause. Vanessa said that was just more legal nonsense I didn't need to read. Then Vanessa is the reason you're now in violation of a court order. Margaret's smile was audible. I'll be filing a motion regarding this violation first thing tomorrow. Every time you contact Dr. Morrison directly, you're creating evidence of contempt. The call ended abruptly. He's panicking, Marcus observed. The board rejection, the eviction notice, and now finding out about the restraining order all in one day. He's going to escalate. Good, James said quietly. Let him escalate. The angrier he gets, the more mistakes he'll make. That night, Natalie's public emergence made its first ripple through the city's social networks. 3 people posted photos from the hospital board meeting with captions like Dr. Morrison looking powerful and professional and board meeting today, great to see Elizabeth Morrison's daughter stepping into her role. Richard saw them. Marcus's surveillance confirmed he spent 20 minutes scrolling through social media, his expression darkening with each image. In the penthouse, Natalie stood at the window overlooking the city. Her hand rested on her belly where her daughter kicked steadily, strong, healthy, oblivious to the war being waged for her future. Week 3 complete, she said quietly. What's next? Sarah appeared beside her, holding a garment bag. Next is the Riverside Medical Foundation Gala. 2 weeks from now. 500 guests. Black tie. And your mother left this for you to wear. She unzipped the bag. Inside was a midnight blue gown, empire-waisted to accommodate late pregnancy, with silver beading that caught the light like stars. She knew I'd be 9 months pregnant. Natalie whispered. She knew you'd need to look like a force of nature. Sarah smiled. Because Richard and Vanessa will be there. He bought tickets 6 months ago, before he even filed for divorce. He's going to see me. He's going to see you transformed. Powerful. Surrounded by your mother's network and completely beyond his reach. Sarah's expression was fierce. And it's going to destroy him. But he'd been most wrong about this. You can't destroy a woman who's been protected by generations of strong women who knew exactly how dangerous underestimation could be. Natalie smiled at her daughter. Let's go home, Sophia. We have work to do tomorrow. And the legacy continued.